Hey, I'm Kendrick Youngblood, and today I'm going to be sharing 10 ways to become a better poet. Now, before I get started, I just want to give you some insight on this new channel, right? And also insight about myself, right? I'm an undergraduate poet at the University of Houston, and I love poetry. I live, breathe, drink, eat poetry, right? And for a while, I've been wanting to share it with people, and I love YouTube, so I figured what better way to do that than to start a YouTube channel for that, right? Now, the purpose of this channel is to give tips for beginner poets, right? Analyze different poems, introduce different forms, interview poets that I know in the Houston area, things of that nature. This is going to be a very poetry-centric channel, right? All right, so without further ado, let's get started. Top 10 ways to become a better poet. All right, so the first one is a no-brainer, but I feel like it needs to be said because it's something I didn't really think of intuitively starting poetry, and it is to write, write, write. I mean, write all the time. So that's the first one. Any chance you get, the moment you think of something, write it down, right? So, like, I remember the moment this clicked in my head, I started to carry my phone with me and write my poems on my phone, right? Because I don't know when I'm gonna be hit with, inspiration from the muses above, right? So I would have my phone on me, go on Google Docs, boom, something comes to me, and I would just write it down real fast. It might just be a line, And then later I would go back to that document and make a poem out of that line. So the first thing is to write any chance you get. You don't know when that inspiration will come, so you just need to take advantage of it. Even when there is no inspiration, you don't just want to rely on that wave of assistance. Sometimes you're going to have to use brute force to push through, but there's a lot of gains that can come from that. So yeah, the very first step is to write all the time. All right, so the second step is to learn your strengths and weaknesses as it pertains to poetry. Now, I took a poetry class last semester that taught me about the four temperaments of poetry. And this was an idea that was spearheaded by a poet by the name of Gregory Orr, right? Now, the four temperaments of poetry are music, structure, story, and imagination, right? Now, upon being taught this, I realized that two of these areas were my strengths and two of them were my weaknesses, right? So, music and structure are definitely my strengths. My weaknesses fall in imagination and story. So if I am to improve as a poet, or if anybody else is to improve as a poet, it requires that you learn what your strengths are. Like I said, mine would be music and structure, and improve my weaknesses. Now, if you need examples of what I mean by each of those temperaments, music would be the sound of the poem, right? So whether it's rhyme or rhythm or meter, things of that nature, how it sounds when read aloud, that is the music of the poem, the flow of the poem, I suppose you could also say. Okay, so structure, right? The form. Are you writing a sonnet? Are you writing a villanelle? Are you writing in couplets? Things of that nature. How long are your lines? Where are you enjambing the lines? All that is structure, right? Story. What narrative is being told, if at all, right? So things of this nature, you want to know whether you're strong or weak in those areas so you can improve those areas. And you might think that you would just know it intuitively, but I'm telling you now, I didn't know I was weak in story until I acknowledged that as a temperament of poetry. And the moment I did, I could now work on that. So yeah, learn your strengths and weaknesses, improve your weaknesses, and turn them into strengths, right? So that's the second step. So the third step in becoming a better poet is to read. Now, I know that sounds intuitive, like the very first step, which was to write, but if you're reading a whole bunch of poems, you're going to find poets you enjoy and then learn why, right? I remember really enjoying poets like T.S. Eliot, mainly because of his rhyme scheme. I was given a poem by him in 11th grade for the first time, and upon reading him, I couldn't get over how layered his rhymes were. And based on how much I enjoyed that, I knew I wanted to incorporate that into my own poetry. I couldn't have gotten that addition to my poetry unless I had read poets such as him. Other things that come to mind when it comes to reading poetry, would be you see a form you've never seen before. Now you want to try that out, or you see a topic that you wouldn't expect to have read, and you're like, oh, okay, now I want to try doing things of that nature. In order to improve, finding out what you enjoy in a poem is imperative, and that can't happen unless you read. So again, the third step, arguably just as important as the first, you have to read. The fourth step is to find a mentor. Now, this mentor doesn't have to be a professional poet who has books published in every literary whatever. No, nothing of that sort. Now, if you can find that, that's great. However, a mentor can be something as simple as somebody who's been doing poetry for maybe a year longer than you have, whose work you really enjoy. However, you know you're not at that level yet, and you know there's something you can gain from them. Find that mentor. I can personally say from experience that aided me a lot. I'll get to one of my mentors in a second, based on the fifth step, but just keep that in mind. Find somebody that you truly enjoy their work, learn what they're doing, have them read your work or listen to your work, and really heed their advice, All right, so the fifth step, which is connected to the fourth step, if you're going to find your mentor, you have to find a poetry community of some sort. Get connected to other poets. That's the fifth step. Get connected to poets in a community. Now, how I found my mentor was because I joined this organization on campus at the University of Houston called UH Coug Slam. And this was the smartest thing I ever did for my poetry career by far. I'm talking, I got introduced to people from all over the city, people who are highly acclaimed in various competitions that they've competed in, things of that nature. And in the process of networking, I ended up coming across somebody by the name of R.J. Wright. Now, those of you who don't know R.J. Wright, he's one of the, if not the best slam poet in Houston. The dude is no joke, right? Like he just wins. Like I've seen him perform. He just kills a competition every time. So like when we acquired him to be our coach for our slam team, it was rather appalling. Like we couldn't believe we had gotten that much talent to teach us, to mentor us, right? Now I would have never gotten that opportunity had I not joined a poetry community. So you see why that's important? It's imperative that if you're going to grow, you need to be among like-minded individuals. Various times when I've been stuck on a poem, I'm just having writer's block and I can't push through, I can't finish the poem, I'll have a friend of mine read it. He or she will share their thoughts and it'll aid me tremendously. Or maybe they won't even share their thoughts about a poem that I'm writing. Instead, they'll spit a poem, or they'll show me a poem that they've written, and upon reading that, I get inspired myself, right? I think the biggest aid about being in a poetry community isn't even the mentors or the friends necessarily who are like-minded individuals. It's really just friendly competition. You know what I'm saying? There's been a lot of times where I've been trying to get published in a certain magazine that I know some of my other friends are sending their stuff to, or I'm in a slam competition against some of my other friends in the community, right? There's nothing like that friendly competition to push you to improve yourself. So that would be the fifth step. The sixth step would be to study other art forms, right? When I say other art forms, I don't mean other forms of poetry. I mean other arts. For example, if you don't listen to music very often, listen to music and really listen. Don't just, bob your head to it while you're driving. Actually play music, feel the flow of the music, listen to the rhythm of the music. That can go a long way in helping your poetry. I remember a lot of times when I would start writing poetry, I would listen to Hans Zimmer and a lot of his cinematic tracks, and that would help me create a buildup of tension in my poem because I was listening to that cinematic escalation, right? So Yeah, other art forms, I already named music. Another one, slam poetry. I brought that up previously, that I was on a slam team called Kook Slam. And I never thought I would do that. Never. In fact, the only reason why I even considered it was because, the captain of the team, the co-captain, Jazib, he happened to go to high school with me. And he was begging me. And I was like, I don't know. That's not really my thing. I am a poet, yes, but I like my stuff on paper. I don't really like performing it or anything like that. But what really pushed me to do it was when my girlfriend was like, hey, Kenny, I think this will go a long way for you. I know you're not used to doing slam poetry, but you've been struggling to grow. Here's an entire community of poets. What better way to get engrossed in that community than to do what they're doing? Try slam poetry. So based on that, I gave it a shot, and it's improved my writing by far. I can't describe how helpful trying slam was for me. And I'll get to more on my experiences in slam in another video. Read novels even, right? Like short stories, like full-scale books, whatever, that can go a long way as well. Based on the imagery that's in there too, you can sort of copy all of that. And rap. I know a lot of people who are deep in the poetry community, they can have this sort of pretentious air when it comes to how they look at rappers, like, they're not really poets, but no, they really are. And so long as you can stay away from that kind of thinking, there's a lot you can grasp from rap as well. So study other art forms. That's the 6th step. The 7th step is to practice various forms of poetry, right? So I'm not talking about different art forms in this case. I mean, let's say you've never written a sonnet before. Write a sonnet. Or let's say you have written a sonnet, but you suck at them. Write them until you're good at them. Try writing in couplets, in tercets, in quatrains. If you really want to exercise your poetic muscles, it requires for you to expand your horizons, to try things that you haven't done before in the realm of poetry. If you've never done free verse, give that a shot. If you rhyme all the time in your poems, try to do that less. Things of that nature can go a long way. If you never write with meter, try writing with meter. Just play with forms. In fact, even you might get to a point where you've tried so many forms, all the well-known ones, villanelles, whatever, and you're like, you know what? How can I expand further? I can tell you how. Create your own form. Invent a form of poetry that no one else has done before. I've done that personally, and it blew my mind what I was able to come up with and how helpful that was for me. So yeah, 7th step, practice various forms. Now, as for the 8th step, this really applies across the board if you want to improve at anything at all. And that is to set goals. Set goals and then keep track of which ones you've completed and which ones you haven't yet. So that's going to require you to write them down, however many they are. So for me personally, when I was setting goals for poetry, I didn't attack the grandest ones for starters. I instead did simple ones. For example, join a poetry organization. I joined Kook Slam. Boom, I crossed that goal off. Or get published for the first time. I got published. I crossed that off as well. You don't want to only write the grandiose goals like, say, publish a book full of poems or win this slam competition, this national slam competition or something like that. Now, of course, you can write those goals, but make sure you have small goals as well, and that will build your momentum towards the bigger goals. So that's very important. Set goals, write them down, keep track of which ones you've completed. By doing that, it'll motivate you that you're actually getting things done, that you're not staying in one place. You might be making slow progress, but you're acknowledging that it's progress nonetheless. So that'll be the 8th step, set goals. As for the 9th step, if you want to improve at poetry and you're showing it to a lot of your friends, it's great if they like it, but there's nothing like a bunch of strangers seeing it. And the best way to do that and to see what they think of it is to submit for publication. So the 9th step is to submit for publication. At first, it's going to be really painful, believe me, when you're getting rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. I'm saying that from experience. I remember getting rejected 16 different times before I was published once. And those 16 different submissions, they had a bunch of poems in them. It wasn't even one poem per submission. It was like 5. So I might have submitted 50 or 60 poems before one of them actually got accepted by a literary magazine. However, that really goes a long way, because as your submissions are being denied, I guess, you kind of start to figure out what can be improved in your own poetry. Now, again, these editors who are accepting or rejecting submissions, it's all their opinion. So maybe your poem is great and they're just not feeling you, or they're not seeing where you're coming from. That's okay. Again, it's just their opinion. However, the better your poetry gets, the more likely they are to accept your poetry. It's a trend that I myself in the poetry community have noticed. It's something other poets have noticed. And you can't get more things published if you don't submit more. So by submitting more, you're more likely to improve. And if you're more likely to improve, you're more likely to get accepted in different literary magazines or literary journals, right? So that's the 9th step: submit for publication. Now the 10th step, it's going to sound real corny, but I can guarantee you this is more important than every other step I've told you. The 10th step of becoming a better poet is to love your poetry. If you're doing anything, any art form, right, and you're not enjoying what you're doing, good luck improving. It's chances are it's not happening. You have to really love your poetry. I'm saying that based on experience. When, like, the very first poem I ever wrote, oh God, like, it was bad, like really bad. I wish I had it. I think it was on The Sin of Greed or something like that. And as terrible as it was, I loved that poem. I thought it was so cool. I was showing it to everybody. Like, look at this poem I've written. That was senior year in high school. Very first poem I ever wrote, like 3.5 years ago. And I can still remember the glee I felt when I completed it. And that spurred me on to do more and better things from there. It is imperative that you love what you do. You love what you write. And if you don't love what you write, I'm not saying try to force yourself to love what you're writing. That might just mean that you need to try a different style. And that's okay. So love your poetry, and that love will take you places. It'll connect you to different people who are also loving poetry, other people who might even love your poetry. Someone's more likely to love your poetry if they see the passion you have for it as it is, right? So yeah, that's the 10th step. Love your poetry. All right. Thank you for listening. Again, I'm Kendrick Youngblood. Feel free to comment down in the comment section below. Like, subscribe. Even if you didn't like it anyway. Thank y'all for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.